It's time for another Football Friday here in the Oklahoman newsroom. I'm Jenni Carlson here with part of our OU coverage team, joined in studio by Tramel, columnist, and Brooke, Pryor, OU writer, and we are talking OU Baylor. It's an 11 o'clock kick on Saturday morning down in Norman. One more morning kick, of course. I know that gets people fired up, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But Brooke, let's start by talking about the return of Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon. Obviously unrelated absences as Perine's hurt, missed 3 games. Mixon suspended, missed the last game at Iowa State. What does all of this mean for Oklahoma in the here and now against Baylor and maybe longer term?
I think it means that right now OU has a stable offense. I mean, they've been able to find answers, moving like Dimitri Flowers around. That's helped a ton. But now they know that they've got their 2 sure thing backs back there. Perine, hopefully all the way healthy. You'd think after he's missed, 3 games that he should be completely healthy. And then Joe Mixon back from suspension. So now they've got a lot more flexibility back there. We've seen Dimitri Flowers. He can do everything. He can run the ball. He can catch the ball. So I think their offense is going to look a lot more dynamic, if that's even possible.
Yeah, and Barry, you saw this Baylor defense earlier in the year against Oklahoma State. Their run defense then was suspicious, and now I got to think it's even worse. I mean, this was a depleted team before the season even started.
Yeah, Baylor's defensive line is not big. It's a smallish defensive line. Depth is an issue, and that was early in the season. The longer the season goes, the more depth is a concern. Sooners should be able to run the ball on them. I mean, it's a travesty of justice that Dimitri Flowers is being sent back to fullback after what he's shown, making way for Mixon and Perine. But, he's a good soldier, a loyal guy. So Sooners should be able to run on these guys. Oklahoma State it snapped out of its run game slump by playing Baylor. People have been running crazy on Baylor. Deontay Foreman at Texas has done it. We saw Hicks at TCU have a monster game last week. No reason why Mixon and Perine won't do the same.
You mentioned Dimitri Flowers, and I'm going to go off script for just a second and rewind to that Iowa State game. You've watched a lot of OU football over the years, Barry. Where does that, sort of stepping in a substitution role in a situation like that, what Flowers did and the way he played, where does that sort of rank in OU lore, if you will?
Well, because it was a different position. That's what really made it stand out. You've seen guys sort of step up when called upon. Charles Thompson in the '87 Nebraska game. I saw Duell Brewer in 90, a true freshman. All the tailbacks were out, and he just carries like 30-something times a game, 3 straight games. But
I don't think Dimitri Flowers is signing on for that
But for a guy to do so much in one game, he looked like Tommy McDonald out there and all the things he was doing. And, it takes a quarterback snap, a shotgun snap, runs for a 4th down conversion, plays fullback, makes an acrobatic touchdown catch in the end zone. Best catch of the night was from Dimitri Flowers. So just for a guy who's really just sort of a blocking back and an occasional pass catcher and out of the spotlight, for him to be put in the spotlight and perform like that was a great night for all.
I didn't think there was any possible way that a guy could, maybe make a push to be Bob Stoops' favorite fullback tight end, that hybrid position. He's had so many favorite ones over the years. Aaron Ripkowski, Blake Bell. I mean, you go down the list of guys I probably can't even remember.
Matt Clapp, J.D. Runnels.
Yeah, I mean, just a ton of these guys over the years that Bob would talk about in such glowing terms. I think what Dimitri Flowers did at Iowa State might elevate it. I don't know if he's to the top of the list, but Bob had to really love what he got out of Dimitri Flowers up there. Brooke, as we talk about Perine and Mixon returning, obviously they're going to, it's good for them to be back on an individual level. But when you look at this offense, who do you feel like their return benefits most? Maybe besides Dimitri Flowers, who gets a breather now that those guys are back. But who does the return of those running backs help most in your mind?
I mean, I think part of it's got to help the offensive line because now they've got more consistent backs behind them and they kind of know their tendencies a little bit more maybe than Dimitri Flowers, who just moved in there at the last minute last week. I think it helps Baker Mayfield knowing that he's got other options, doesn't just have to throw the ball every time or feel like he's unsure of who he's handing it off to. I think it helps Lincoln Riley as a whole. Now he can continue that balanced play call that he's favored a lot this season. I think it, again, just benefits the whole entire offense.
Mary, when you look at the run of games that OU has here to finish the year, we know their defense is going to be tested. All of these offenses coming up, Baylor may be the least likely to test them offensively, although West Virginia has kind of become a defensive team. But to have the offense with all the weapons, I mean, scale of 1 to 10, importance has got to be pretty high, wouldn't it be?
Yeah, and it just does so much when that running threat is there. As much as we all love Dimitri Flowers, he's not the home run hitter that Pirine or Mixon are.
Right.
And when you got those two guys back there, sometimes at the same time, I mean, defenses are just scared to death. And you got a game plan for D.D. Westbrook because he's gonna get you whether you do or not. And that just opens up things. We saw Jeffrey Mead have a couple of nice catches. So the other receivers, to me, are starting to step up and perform much better. People like Geno Lewis and people like Jeffrey Mead and that crowd. Nick Basquin had a nice night in Ames. So defenses have to do something. And they're not going to say, let's worry about Nick Basquin. They're going to say, put another safety up on the block because we got to do something. We got to tackle Samaje Perine. And can't take the safety off of D.D. Westbrook. So those other receivers are going to have more room to run because those guys are in the backfield.
Let me remind people that you're watching Football Friday. This is our OU edition of Football Friday as we're talking about OU Baylor Saturday morning, 11 o'clock in Norman. Brooke, as we talking about the OU offense, I mentioned sort of the stress that's going to be on the OU defense to end this season. Baylor will be without Shock Linwood. They've suspended him for this game. But what kind of performance would you like to see out of this OU defense? I mean, this may not be the biggest of the tests to come, but they're coming off 2 games where the defense wasn't really tested. What do you want to see out of this defense on Saturday?
I mean, I think it's unrealistic to think that they're going to have a game that they did against Kansas and hold the opposing team to just 3 points. But I think I would like to see consistent cornerback play. They've shown flashes of it, but then they always seem to give up that big play. And that's been a big problem where they give up 1 or 2 big plays and all of a sudden they've let this other team back in. They only beat Iowa State by 10 points. Granted, it's crazy circumstances in Ames on a Thursday night. But I think for them to be successful, they need to shut down the deep throws. To some point, you can't completely shut down those back shoulder throws, but I think they've got to figure out a way to better defend them. And I think I'd like to see more consistent play up front on the D-line. It's been good so far, but I think that some of the younger guys need to come up, step in a little bit more, show that they're rebounding from the injuries as well, and just put together a consistent performance before they play West Virginia and Oklahoma State.
When you bring up a good point about the injuries, that's probably been, I mean, everybody has injuries, so no team goes through the year without injuries, but they have had some injuries that have really kind of slowed progress. But Barry, coming off these 2 games against not great opponents in Kansas and Iowa State, is there any false sense of where this defense is? Any belief that maybe they're better than they are and maybe they're in for a rude awakening? Or where do you think this defense is right now?
No, I don't think they're have advanced very far past what we saw against Tech and Texas and TCU. All those teams got into the 40s. Tech got past 40, into the 50s. But what you're seeing with this Oklahoma defense is missing a lot of guys. I mean, Bob Stoops, he told us 14 players off the 2 deep in September 1st, in August, were gone in Ames. So they're reshuffling. They're getting guys in. Dakota Austin, of all people, made an appearance in Ames. He came and played a couple of plays back at corner. Actually knocked the ball down. I'd put the guy in the game myself. But I don't think this Oklahoma defense has gotten over any kind of hurdle. Baylor's going to score on them. Tobacco Road's right. They're not going to win this game 56-10. Baylor's going to score, but just hold them to under 42 or 40 or 59. Just put up a decent number. Hold them to 31, and they're probably going to win this game easily.
Right. If they're in the 30s, I got to think most people in the defensive room are feeling good, right, Brooke?
I think that's got to be the goal, is to keep them under 30. Try to shut down Seth Russell. If they can shut down Katie Cannon and Ishmael Zamora, or at least limit them, I think that's how you come out of this, and you've got to feel pretty good about what your defense is able to do.
All right, we haven't talked sort of more broadly about Oklahoma and Baylor as a whole. This is a matchup. I won't even call it a rivalry in referencing years past, because there was a point in time when OU was, 20-0 all time against Baylor. Then Baylor starts to hit the accelerator with Robert Griffin III. They start to win some games, knock off OU. We saw last year's game down in Waco, pretty contentious game. between these two teams that OU wins, and now all the sexual assault cover-up issues that are going on down at Baylor, sort of adding more layers to this. Things I haven't even mentioned, Jeff Levy being on the sideline, on and on and on, that this has gone. But Brooke, where do you sort of put your finger on the pulse of this rivalry? Because I will call it that now. It wasn't maybe 5 years ago, but now I'd call it right. But where do you put your finger on with this rivalry?
Well, in talking to some of the guys, it seems it's a very much old money versus new money, or old establishment versus the upstarts. And Oklahoma doesn't like that. They don't like that Baylor is coming into the Big 12 and has won some Big 12 titles, has tried to take some of the glory away from OU. They're trying to restore the order as they see it in the Big 12 in their eyes. And so it gets really chippy. It gets really physical. There have been guys that get ejected in the last couple of years. That's been a big talk. I think Charles Tapper a couple of years ago got ejected. Matt Diamond, I believe, also got ejected. Yeah. So in talking with Baker Mayfield, he said, yeah, it gets chippy. You know, we don't like them. They don't like us. That can be said about a lot of teams in the Big 12 and their relationship with OU. But I think it's just different with Baylor because they've been the biggest threat to OU's tradition and history, and they don't like that. They don't like the new guys.
Where does the dislike, Barry, within this hatred come from in your mind?
Oh, I think it comes from, on Baylor's side, it comes from you always sort of dislike the team that's always been on top and sort of rules and sort of enjoys being the top dog. From OU standpoint, they don't like it when somebody is, an affront to that, is saying, hey, we want a piece of that pie. We want some of your lunch money.
Right.
And to me, it's a little bit of an NFL type rivalry. You know, in college football, it really doesn't matter what OU and Texas are doing. They hate each other. They're big rivals. In-state rivalries, Bedlam, Auburn, Alabama, Arizona State, Utah, BYU, whoever. In-state, it's rivalry. It really, the quality of the programs or the competition is not as much of a factor. In the NFL, though, if somebody gets good, 49ers Cowboys in the 90s, all of a sudden that was a big rivalry because they were playing for titles. And that's what's happened here is Baylor and Oklahoma with little history, with no competitive interest, all of a sudden, they're batting heads for the Big 12 title. Mm-hmm. And Baylor was the top dog in 13 and 14. They beat the Sooners 3 out of 4 years, and all of a sudden Oklahoma's saying, hey, these guys are legit. We got to answer this call. So that's what it is. If Baylor falls, I think the rivalry goes away.
Right.
But until then, we've had some players. Baker Mayfield said it. Mm-hmm. We don't like each other very much.
Right. And I think that you guys are hitting on the big ones, but I think about things like recruiting too. You think about the fact that for years Oklahoma could go wherever it wanted in Texas, and it was probably going to go against Texas and Texas A&M. Maybe for players, might cross OSU down there a little bit when you're talking about major college programs. But now you've got some of those prime guys that are saying yes to Baylor, and so you've got teammates, you've got coaches knowing the kids, they know what's going on within the recruiting, what somebody's saying about us. So I think that adds a whole other in the program layer that's really interesting. And then obviously, as I mentioned before, there's these issues with the sexual assault scandal that's going on at Baylor right now. Which we'll close talking about that. But Brooke, you had Brenda Tracy, you and Ryan Aber had Brenda Tracy on the Nonfiction Writers podcast earlier this week. You wrote a story about what she had to say, but obviously a lot still left with this situation because Baylor's still looking at it. They're still having trouble with actually handling really kind of the cleanup and the moving forward and improvement. What struck you about what you heard from Brenda Tracy?
Well, Brenda, we talked with her for 30 minutes, and we could have talked with her for 2 hours. There's so much to unpack there. And I think the line that stuck with me the most, I wrote it down, I underlined it, I used it in my story today. She says, I keep waiting for Baylor to be the hero, and instead they're being the poster child for doing exactly the opposite of that. So they had this chance when all of this came out, all of these horrible things that happened there, to get in front of the story and be really transparent about what was going on. And instead, they backpedaled. They tried to hide even further. They blamed everyone. They've blamed the police department in Waco. They've blamed people who've been fired, not Coach Art Briles. There's still this huge movement that he is innocent. He did nothing wrong. On and on, but there's just a culture of blame. There's a culture, some of apathy, and a whole lot of defiance at Baylor. And I think that's the biggest problem that Brenda has with it, and that a lot of people have with it, because they've had a chance to make things right. They've had a chance to, not absolve what they've done, but they've had a chance to get in front of the issues. And instead, you have things like this blackout game. Baylor says the blackout uniforms had nothing to do with supporting Coach Art Briles. However, then you have players on Twitter saying that, no, we chose to wear these uniforms. The students chose to wear black. They sold T-shirts before the game that said CAB on them. There's a flag being flown inside the stadium supporting him. So there's clearly a lot of poison, I think, at Baylor right now as it relates to that.
And Brenda Tracy, a rape survivor herself, who's now speaking to teams and universities about what they should be doing and trying to avoid these things. And Barry, as Brooke says, there's not really seemingly a lot of leadership within Baylor right now to make this right, to figure out what to do. You wrote about on your blog and in print earlier this week about Jim Grobe, the coach at Baylor, who really kind of have to start to wonder, he was apparently brought in to maybe try to rectify some things, but there's a lot of question marks now to that. And, as Brooke mentioned, this blackout game with the Coach Art Briles stuff. I mean, where is Baylor right now? And you wrote about this early in the week, Big 12 future. Where does all of this lie? Is Baylor somehow checked out morality-wise?
Well, I tend to think that there are people at Baylor that would like to do the right thing. It appears to be a chaotic organization, though, in terms of who's in charge. You've got a new athletic director. You've got an embattled board of regents. You've got a new president, an interim president. You've got an interim football coach. It's just a place really lacking in leadership. Previously, it lacked quality leadership. Now it really just doesn't have leadership of any kind. It's just sort of every department for himself.
Well, and you referenced Grobe saying Monday morning that they didn't have a problem with Shock Linwood, and a couple hours later they suspend him, Barry.
Yeah, I actually like Jim Grobe. I was a big fan of his at Wake Forest. I thought his coaching job was amazing. I thought it was a small example of what Bill Snyder has done at Kansas State, but he's just in a bad situation at Baylor, and it looks to me like he's not an interim coach. It looks like he's a figurehead. He's trotted out to talk to the media. He doesn't really appear to know what's going on. I'm not sure how many decisions he's making. I'm not sure that he really has his thumb on Baylor football.
Well, and this all leads back to a week ago, Friday before Baylor plays TCU, his assistants tweet out a statement after a Wall Street Journal story basically in support of Art Briles. Mm-hmm. Then they go out the next day and get absolutely creamed by TCU. Leads to the question, Brooke, has Baylor, I asked earlier, has Baylor checked out morality-wise? Have they checked out football-wise in the last couple weeks?
I think so. I think the distractions at this point are just piling on. And at first, I believe Baylor was able to kind of use some of it to fuel this team and say, we don't have our head coach, but we're still just as good as we used to be. And now, with more dissension happening, more questions coming up, people pointing a finger at Baylor and saying, what are you doing? Why can't you get this right? I think it's finally starting to pile up, and you can tell that, if coaches are spending their Friday nights trying to get together a statement to tweet it out, what are you supposed to be doing? What other things would you be doing with your time other than being distracted here and trying to support a man who's no longer on your university? So I think that you can kind of tell that these coaches are dedicating their efforts off the football field, and these players are then also following the lead of their coaches and being distracted by that. When you have players tweeting out the real reason behind a blackout game, that's something that's always in the back of their mind that other programs don't have to deal with.
What about it, Barry? Are they done for football-wise?
Well, we have no way of knowing. We can just sort of analyze what we've seen on the field. And when you play a team that is you should be better than, which Baylor's been better than TCU this year. TCU the week before lost at home to Texas Tech, which is sort of a drifting team itself. And to play that game in Waco and for Baylor to dominate 62-22, that's a sign. That's not schematic. That's not talent. That's a focus. That's a mental. That's an emotional problem. Yeah. So will they get it back for Norman on Saturday? Who knows? But it certainly seems like a recipe for this team to have checked out.
All right, well, let's get to that. Let's talk about predictions. I think we across the board picked OU to win this game, but Barry, you had a big spread. I think 52-20 was your score. Why?
Well, I think 52. I think everybody's on board with me. I'm just call me the eternal optimist. I like Mike Stoops. I think he's got a shot to hold him to 20. If he does, everybody will be happy.
52-35 was yours, Brooke. What do you think?
Well, I felt good about the 52, and see, I didn't even see Barry's score pick before that, so I'm glad that we were both in the 50 range. 35, Barry's a little bit more optimistic about the defense than I am. I feel like I've seen the same plays happen too many times to think that they can hold them to under 20. If they hold them to 35, I think you've got to count that as a win. Obviously, if they get to 52, it would be a win. But I think that you can count that as a successful afternoon.
I've got a little smaller score, 45-35, but I think OU controls this game. I just think Baylor's got enough explosiveness left on offense to maybe score, a touchdown or 10 points in the fourth quarter against maybe some reserves that are playing. And I think you add in the chippiness of this rivalry, what we were talking about before, and you just never know when, emotions get the best of you, something goes a little bit haywire. But it's going to be interesting.
The chippiness of this rivalry means reserves might not play, no matter what the score
That's
is.
true. That's true. Every point matters in this one. We'll see how it goes. And be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.